she said that unless you told James Jamerson to cool it a bit, he'd go crazy. And I understand exactly what he was doing because I went through the same process. And you do when you sit in studios for 20 years.
Hey, James here from eBassGuitar, and welcome to the final interview in our 60k celebration series here on the eBassGuitar YouTube channel. This interview is very close to home for me. Paul Westwood was my teacher for over 4 years, and without doubt, the most influential person in my musical education. He's a world-class session player, and I don't say that lightly, a staggeringly innovative bass player with an unmistakable thumb technique, the author of the Bass Bible, a book that changed my playing forever well back in 1998 and continues to shape players from around the world. But my journey with Paul wasn't always straightforward. I'm dyslexic. During my studies, I found parts of the learning process pretty challenging, but Paul always had my back. He found an approach that worked for me, supported me, and reminded me again and again, the goal wasn't just to play well, it was to be employable. And I've never forgotten that. In this conversation, we explore his time as a first call studio musician, his transition to touring, and the moment he realized that sharing knowledge just wasn't helpful, it was absolutely essential in life. He shares reflections on Jaco Pastorius, little known stories about James Jamerson, watch out for those, and reveals insights I'd never heard before, even after 4 years of lessons. Paul is one of Britain's unsung bass heroes and someone I truly believe deserves international recognition. And as we close this 60k celebration series, I couldn't think of a better way to finish this than by sitting down with the individual who helped set my whole journey in motion. So let's dive in. Paul, you've been a huge influence on me personally and professionally, and your work has shaped countless bass players over the last 20 to 30 years. But I'd love to start off with the person behind the educator, the session musician, and the author. Who is Paul Westwood when the bass is down and the bass is back in its case and the classroom's empty?
Good question, actually, because I know who I am. But when you're working in studios, for instance, not a lot of people do know who you are. And doing gigs, and I'll qualify that. So who you think you are and how other people perceive you to be are quite different things. An example, I worked for a guy called John Coleman in studios for years. I started off doing gigs in like Manchester with Lulu and those sort of groups. And John was the MD. And he was very kind. He liked what I did live, and he gave me loads of studio work for 20 years or more. And then I had a little band running, and I invited him to a gig. And we did the gig, and I went up to him afterwards and poured him a drink and said, "What do you think?" And he said, "I didn't know you could play like that." And I said, "Well, you never asked me." So in other words, while I was doing his stuff, I was playing straight ahead commercial bass in a TV band orchestra, whatever you call it. Another situation was I'd get to a studio in the morning and I'd be playing a riff, and they'd say, "Oh, Paul, improvise. You're an improviser, not a riff player." Oh, okay, all right. And I get to a studio in the afternoon and they say, "Oh, Paul, don't improvise. You're a riff player." Am I? Oh, okay. So everyone had a completely different idea of what you do personally. So I know who I am, but it did reach a point when I was doing loads of studio work. I'd done such a wide variety of music. Each day would be an adventure. At one point I thought, if I was going to write some of my own music, what would I do? What would I do? What would I write? I didn't know. So every day for 6 weeks, I just played for hours to try and find what is my music. Because, if I said to you, "What's your music?" you'd say, "Oh, it's this, it's that, I do this." I didn't know what I liked.
Wow.
Because as a studio player, you can't really be prejudiced. Somebody brings you a really tired tune and they say, "What do you think?" You say, "Well, great, yeah, we can do something with that." And it's your job to make it gleam like a Rolls Royce, purr like a Rolls Royce. That's your job. So you can't dismiss it. And something I discovered very early on, working with a band at the Lyceum, which is now has the Lion King on. Used to play with the show band there. And we used to play all sorts of different kinds of music, in some cases quite badly, like old time music hall and dance band stuff. And then it was only years later when I was working with studio musicians, we played some of the same tunes. And I got a real buzz because the musicians played it so well. And I realized that the reason I didn't enjoy it initially is because I was playing it badly.
Right.
So I realized it's your own fault. So if you're not having a good time, it's your fault. And
Right.
it's your job to make everybody else sound better than they are. That's your job as a bass player. So this is part of who I am as a person. So it's one of the reasons I got into the education side. So my family were all artists, musicians, and teachers. And in those days, you couldn't be an artist or a musician. And we were going back to, 1724. You had to be a bit of a weirdo to be a musician or a teacher. They led such weird lives. So I came into a generation where I was really lucky in as much you could be a musician in those days, in these days, and not be a weirdo.
Excellent. Got a question. When you did your 6 weeks, I think you said, of musical introspection, finding, as some people would say, your voice, what did you discover?
It's all the crumbs that make up the loaf. That was a phrase used by James DeWolf, who ran a music library company. And he was talking about all the bits and pieces that make up the final product. And that always stayed at the back of my mind. What is it that you want to do that involves all the things you've done in the past? Because
Right.
everything that you've done in the past makes up who you are now and what you're doing now. And my father made the same point. Everything you've done in the past will come together. So all the session work, the teaching, the library albums, the commercial albums, it's all actually coming together at the moment. And it's all sort of not colliding, but it's beginning to run in parallel. And the danger when you're a bit younger is you tend to do one thing or another, and you kind of go in different ways, and you think, well, where am I supposed to go? And then at a certain point, it all kind of comes together. Um, and I said to my mother at one point, what's the answer to all this? And she said, just do your best. You
Right.
can't do better than your best. Just do your best. So I thought, okay, yeah, it's so simple. Wise words. So everything I did, I tried to do my best. So when it kind of comes together as you get a bit older, I'm only 24 now. Sorry, 32, I lie. Um, it kind of comes together in a good way because you've done your best in the past. So there's nothing to kind of undo in that sense. So what I discovered as I was pulling all bits and pieces together, I was about 28, 30, something like that. Yeah, I've been about 30. It was looking at pop music, looking at funk, looking at jazz, Latin, all the various things I was interested in. I'd had African friends, so I got into what they were doing. South American friends, people from Spain, and I was a big Paco de Lucia fan. So, what is it that is part of all this that maybe I can develop? So, I'd already been experimenting with loads of bits and pieces, but they're all kind of diffused, they're all separate. And the reason they were separate is because when you're a studio player, and I'd always wanted to be a studio player from the age of 16, that's what I wanted to do. You kind of go into a studio and they say, okay, this is the track, and you put your pop hat on, or your rock hat, or your funk hat, or your soul hat, or your jazz hat, and that's what you do. But when you want to do something for yourself, you can't put individual hats on. What is it that is pulls it all together in a collective sense?
Right.
So you develop a style that incorporates all this stuff. And so when you write a book, as I did a while later, you start to isolate individual things that make up that particular phrase or that style. And then when I was teaching even later on, I thought, well, how do you teach people what you know? So you take something and you break it down, you deconstruct it, and you realise that some of it is a James Jamerson bit, some of it's a Chuck Rainey bit, some's a Carol Kay, some's a Jacko, some's a Stanley Clarke, and you know a bit of Stan Getz. I like Stan Getz. He's very musical. Not a popular word at the moment. He's very
Sure.
musical. He plays tunes.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, he's just a naturally gifted person. He knew exactly what he was playing, but so
Yep.
many people think he didn't know what he was doing. It was just natural. But whenever you see a really great player, when I see a great player, I don't think he's a genius. I see someone who's worked really hard.
Yeah. Yeah. I would
And
agree.
I got this when I was talking to Derek Watkins, who was one of the greatest trumpet players ever. Wonderful player. There's bits and pieces of him online, and nothing does him justice because when you're actually working with a guy for 20 years or something, he used to be sitting there
Yeah,
on
yeah.
TV shows and in sessions. It's a huge inspiration. I remember saying to him once, you know, you never seem to practice. He said, oh, I just did so much of it when I was young.
Yep.
That's why he was so good. He put the time in,
Yep. Yeah. For
and
anybody who doesn't know, Derek Watkins is the James Bond trumpet player who did that
he
great
played
Bond
on
film.
every single Bond theme
Yeah.
up until he died.
Yep. Yep.
But a sensational player. I did a TV show with Derek once, and Sting and all these various other people were on the show, and Harry Connick Jr. was on with his band. It
Right.
was a variety show. All these, you know, the
Yeah.
Royal
Yeah.
Variety shows. It was one of those things. And anyway, Harry Connick Jr.'s band were on as well, and we were playing in the pit to play people on, play people off, and if there was a singer like Janet Jackson, we'd play a tune for her. And we did a play on for Harry Connick's band, who are up on stage above us.
Yeah.
So they did their bit for Harry,
Yep.
and then when they finished, we played an interpart, which means, or outer part, going into a commercial break or getting them off the stage, you know. So that the audience does that. And during the rehearsals, the trumpet players on stage were sort of playing screamers and mucking about. And I thought, that's very odd. But anyway, there you go. Yeah, they were American, which is neither here nor there. But they didn't know what was going on in England, which was interesting. So anyway, we had a tea break, and two of the guys in Harry Connick's band were walking into the tea room, and they saw Derek Watkins, and they came over and they said, we're mortified. We can't believe how we just behaved. We didn't realize it was you in the pit doing the play on and play off. We thought it was recorded. We really apologize. And they're sort of paying homage, I think they say. Um, and I was looking at Derek and I said, am I believing what I'm seeing? He said, oh yeah, don't worry. He said, I know these guys.
Brilliant.
He was iconic,
Yep.
iconic. But it was another one where it's the crumbs that make up the pie. He played every style of music.
Yep.
Sensational player, absolutely, and he was one of my heroes. And I'll tell you what hero is. He's so on the ball that when you're playing a session and you're under an enormous pressure to get the thing done, if he made a mistake, he'd hold his hand up and the band would stop and we'd do another take. And I remember thinking, I was quite young, I remember watching and thinking, that guy's got guts. Because normally you make a mistake and you think, oh, I hope no one heard. You can't do that on a recording. Because if there's a mistake, you'll hear it for the next 20 years.
Yep. God, that is fascinating.
So I always remembered that, always remembered that. So you've got to be reliable.
Yeah.
So it's all the crumbs that make up the pie. So when you find out who you are, it's all these experiences, and it's working with people who are completely unknown, who are inspirational, and people who are maybe really well known, but they're not inspirational. And it's just all these daft experiences trying to find out how it works, why it works for you, and therefore what makes you excited about certain things. So when you form your own band later, you can hopefully play things that make you really interested. So the band I've got at the moment is fascinating to play with, and it's funny. It's very funny. The things I hear people playing, I find very amusing, and all the things we're playing are my compositions. So it's all the stuff I've collected over the years, and it's everything that makes you what you are. It's just a huge collection of stuff.
This is amazing. Let's go right back to the beginning and talk about what drew you to the bass guitar. When did you know the bass guitar was going to be your life's work, and how did that happen?
Right. I was a guitar player from the age of 10, and I nagged my mum rotten to get a guitar. And it cost £7 from the music shop. And I got the guitar home and I was tuning it up and the string broke. And I burst into tears. I said, I've broken the guitar. And she said, don't worry, love, we can get a new string. So she said, I'll get you a music teacher. So he taught me how to tune up and how to play basic chords. So I got quite adept. So by the time I was 13, there were some mates at school forming a band. So I got together with them, and they said, well, actually, we need a bass player rather than a guitar player. So I said, oh, I'll get my mum to buy me a guitar. That cost the first bass cost £10.
Nice.
So my parents weren't big spenders. I wasn't spoilt in that respect, but I learnt to play the thing. And my guitar teacher showed me how to read for the bass, and there were no bass teachers in those days. So I just had to listen to what was going on, figure out what the hell a bass line was, because there was nobody to explain it. You listen to a pop record, and my guitar teacher was a jazz player. He couldn't explain what a pop bass line was. The most modern he got was the boogie woogie. Do 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 do. That was the most modern he got. So I wanted to get into Cream and Hendrix and all this sort of thing. So I just had to listen to records and figure it out. So by the time I was about 14, I thought, this is for me. This is what I want to do.
Yeah.
By the age of 15, 16, I knew what I wanted to do, didn't know how to do it. So my mum saw an advert newspaper for musicians required for the National Youth Jazz Orchestra.
Amazing.
So she
Just
said,
roughly what year was this?
69.
Right, fantastic. Yep.
She said, do you fancy that? And I said, well, not knowing anything about anything, I said, yeah, great. So I went up to London with my guitar, and there was a guitar player better than me in the band. So afterwards, the band leader said, well, I think we prefer the other guitar player. I said, okay, that's fine. I said, but I do play bass, and I'm better than the guy you've got. They said, okay, bring your bass next week.
Brilliant.
And he wasn't a great reader. He wasn't a great player. So it wasn't like I was muscling in. He'd
Great.
only been there a couple of weeks anyway. So it wasn't a big deal. Anyway, I sat down on the chair and we played a couple of tunes, and the pad of music was that thick.
Yep.
And I'd never played jazz. I'd never played a walking bass line. So it's flying by the seat of your pants. So I just went through the whole pad of music and just learnt everything. That was my school. So for the next 2 years, I played in Nigel. And then moving into the professional world was not a big jump, because through Nigel, and it's still going
Yep.
all these years
Yeah.
later. It was an amazing experience. So if you haven't worked with a big band before, go and do it, particularly if they're a drop dead big band. So I walked in, and I just heard them playing the first tune. I thought, wow, it just blows your brains out. It's incredible, absolutely incredible. I'll give you an idea, experience what it was like. I was 15 and a half, and I went to a music Easter course that Nigel had organised, and there were three band leaders on three separate days. The first big band I sat in with was run by Maynard Ferguson. Now, if you're not sure who Maynard Ferguson is, look him up.
Yeah.
He will blow your brains out. he was the most incredible musician.
Yeah.
He gave us a very small talk, counted the band in, and before the band played a note, we were swinging. That's how good he was. And
Amazing.
as we were about to play the first note, he was playing trumpet, went, why, yeah, and I thought, bloody hell, wow. It was so much larger than life. And that was my introduction. I thought, yes, this is it.
Brilliant.
And it opened my ears to not just guitars and keyboards and drums, but brass sounds, harsh sounds, soft sounds, and all the voicings,
Yep.
the harmony with the trumpets, the trombones, the saxophones. Amazing sound. And that was a real voyage of discovery. The next day, the band leader was Phil Woods. And if you don't know who Phil Woods is, look him up. And I got to know Phil Woods a little bit. I went to see him at Ronnie's and
Yep.
bent his ear. I was
Brilliant.
16. What did I know? And he was like a Charlie Parker.
Yep.
It's the only way you can describe him. He
Yeah.
wasn't as mad as Charlie Parker, but very, very nice guy. Fantastic player. And then the third day, the band leader was John Heisman, who you don't know who he is. Look him up. He
Yep.
was he had a band at the time called Colosseum, who
Yep.
I'd been to see at the Royal Albert Hall, and they were gobsmacking. And I worked with John loads of times in the future. We got on really, really well.
Yep.
He's one of the great drummers, in my humble opinion, of all time. And I've worked with the Steve Gadds and the Simon Phillips and Billy Cobhams. I've worked with all those guys, all fantastic players. John was, he played the band.
Yep.
He was never conscious of the fact that he was trying to be somebody special. He was playing the band. That
Yep.
was a Buddy Rich phrase.
Yeah.
Buddy Rich couldn't read. John was not a great reader. And when they said, "What's your approach to playing the band, playing the drums?" He said, "I don't play the drums. I play the band." Very often you can find a guy who's really into showing off and that sort of thing. And drummers are famous. I don't know who it was. There was a guy that was playing with Rod Stewart. I remember listening to him thinking, this is awful. He was loud and there'd be an 8 bar break. And during those 8 bars, he was thinking up the next phrase, the next fill he's going to do. And the fill that he did had nothing to do with what was going on around him.
Yeah.
He was what they call one of the hired guns.
Yeah.
They get paid a great deal of money on all the big rock tours, which is fine, great. But for me, it was tasteless because he was being a star. You're not a star. You're playing the band.
Yep.
So your job as a bass player is to support people. So if you or I are playing in a band and someone's doing, say, a saxophone solo or singing a song, you're trying to play something which weaves in around them, which supports them. So if a singer just goes, we, the audience goes, oh, fantastic singer. No, they're not. It's the way you supported them that made them sound fantastic.
Yeah. That's a fascinating distinction.
And this is really, really important. Same with the soloist. Your job is to support. And I learned from listening to people like Jacko, who was a wonderful player, but he did have issues. He was bipolar. He did have issues that sometimes the devil would get into him, and he'd be being a star, and he wasn't supporting. So people like Michael Brecker will get furious with him because he wasn't supporting his solo. He was in his own world. He was stealing the limelight,
Yeah.
which is not supporting someone. They get furious. And I talked to Wayne Shorter at Abbey Road Studios. We're doing a film or something. And I said, "Oh, how's Weather Report going?" He said, "Well, it's not at the moment. We just fired Jacko."
Wow.
So I'd heard stories about this because he was always getting fired.
Yeah.
And I said, "So what? Why is that?" He said, "Because he won't play the bass. He just wants to play solos." And he said, "Weather Report don't play solos. He said we play solo lines, but they interweave. So it's like
Interesting.
more like fugue-like. That's why they were a commercial band in that sense, and not a jazz band." and Jacko was getting more into jazz. So Wayne said, we told him, well, go and form your own jazz group, which he did, which is fine. But your job as a bass player is to support.
Yeah.
So sometimes you play very little because
Yep.
it doesn't need much.
Yeah.
So I did some stuff for Leanne Rimes, great singer. I didn't need to do much. I did stuff for Pavarotti. I didn't need to do much. You
Yep.
don't need to. So you can't be a star. They're the star. And then there are other people who'll be nameless who are not such great singers, and you bury them. You, you write lots of stuff. It's the only
Interesting.
way that you can make everything.
Yeah.
You have to go by your instincts. If something's not happening, you've got to make it happen.
Interesting.
And
Yeah.
if somebody's really sparkling, they're really on form, then you go back a little bit because it happens without you needing to do loads of stuff. And if you push it too far, then it becomes tasteless. And I always remember Martha Reeves. Remember Martha and the Vandellas?
Yeah, of course.
She said that if unless you told James Jamerson to cool it a bit, he'd go crazy. And I understand exactly what he was doing because I went through the same process. And you do when you sit in studios for 20 years. When you're trying to shape a song, you've got to find out what the parameters are. So imagine a racehorse is in a race and he's running. You've got rails either side. You've got fences either side to keep him on straight and narrow. He can't just run off in any direction. So
Yep.
so let's call those parameters. So what Jameson was trying to do is find out what's the minimum he can play, what's the most he can play, and then what can he do in between. So
Right.
imagine you're a racehorse
Yeah,
and
yeah.
you've got to
Yeah.
find your parameters.
Interesting.
So I had the same experience with a guy called Alan Ainsworth. I used to do loads of
Yep.
television shows for him. And we'd be doing a particular run through of a song, for instance, and I'd be mucking about, doing all sorts of daft things, and then we'd finish the tune, the first run through, I should say, and he might look up at me and say, "Have you found it yet, Paul?" Because he knew I was looking for ideas. Now he'd gone to great pains to write out a bass line. If I just played the bass line that he'd written, I'd have never worked again for him.
Interesting. Very interesting.
So the reason he booked me was because I didn't play what he'd written. I was playing the band. So in other words, if the band's cooking and I'm going boom, 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 go home.
Yeah.
You need to support the band. So he knew I was never being a star. I was supporting the band. So at that point, I might say to him, "Yeah, I've got it, Alan. Don't worry, I found it." Or I might say, "Just give me 10 seconds." And the guys would go, "Oh, Westwood's at it again. Oh, God, get your paper out, lads." Um, and I'd be fiddling about. "Oh, I got it, Alan. Okay." But it would save ages of mucking about. So I just found the line I wanted. Then we'd do a take, and that was it.
Do you know what I find really interesting about this conversation, particularly having been in different guises of this particular conversation for probably the last 30 years? I had a teacher before you who would play particularly what was written on the part. And that was his whole thing. And he even said to me, I once had a musical director actually say, "Thank you so much for actually playing what was written on the part." But as I've gone through my years and I've spoken to more and more musical directors and more bass players with huge amounts of experience like you, our job is to interpret what's on the part, but within those guidelines which
Yeah.
experience and maturity gives you. What's your take on that?
Right. I've got as you were talking, loads of different things flashed through my mind, but there was one that made a big
Go
impression
on.
because it was my years of experience at that point that enabled me to handle the situation diplomatically. And when you have quite strong feelings and you wear your heart on your sleeve, I don't hide my feelings very well. I was on a session once
I
where
remember.
a very well-known singer sang a really dodgy note, and I went like that, and I caught her eye, and she went, "Sorry." I can't help it. I'm who I am. I was doing a concert at the Royal Albert Hall. It was a 90-piece orchestra. It was the
Wow.
LSO, the London Symphony Orchestra. There were 9 double basses and a sea of other musicians. There was a drummer, a keyboard player, and myself. We were the token contemporary musicians. All the others were classical players,
Sure.
which is fine. We had a guy who was conducting the orchestra who I got the general impression was conducting but staying out of it. Do you know what that means?
Uh,
He wasn't going to give any direction. He was
right.
counting time.
Yeah, yeah. I
Now,
get exactly what you mean. Yeah.
a
Wow.
conductor's job is to give you a clue about
Yes.
whether it's right or wrong. He
Yeah.
was just looking at the page and doing that.
Yep. Gotcha.
Give me a clue.
Yeah.
So we're playing we're playing this music, and bless whoever the arrangers were, they'd written the double basses, 9 double basses, and the bass guitar in unison. And there's an old phrase from years ago: the groove was like dragging the Queen Mary through a sea of Mars bars.
I've never heard that before. Brilliant.
Yeah, it was like, oh, it was painful.
Yeah.
So there's 3 contemporary musicians, keyboards, bass, and drums, and we're outnumbered by 97 people, 87 people,
Yeah. Yeah.
and we're playing this stuff. And I thought, oh, this is awful. It went against everything that is in my instincts.
Yeah.
And you
Yeah.
have to go by what's in your instinct. If you feel something is wrong, and you just sit there and you play for 2 hours like an idiot, then it's your own fault. So we're playing away, and I thought, oh, this is awful. I'll sod it. I'll just start playing a more modern groove. And I'd worked with John Barry, I'd worked with Debbie, and all these various people, but they weren't in a position to do anything because
Yep.
they either weren't there for the rehearsal or they were sitting in the back of the stalls and didn't want to interfere. So I started improvising a little bit, and I just looked up at the MD. Give us a clue. Nothing. So I thought, okay, well, back in your box, played what was written. I thought, oh, this is awful. So I thought, sod it. So I improvised a little bit more, looked up, nothing.
Yeah. Yeah.
I could see, I could feel it. He knew what I was doing, but he was not going to get involved
Yep.
because if he did something that the composers didn't like, then he's not going to work for them again.
Yep.
So this is all going through my mind. I thought, you bastard, give us a clue. Nothing. So in the end, I thought, oh, excuse my French. The horns came out. I thought this needs a kick up the arse. Now, the Royal Albert Hall is a fabulous place to play when you're on stage.
Yep.
If it's not too loud, it's the most fabulous place because the walls aren't too close. And
Interesting.
when the walls are close, you get echo coming back at you. You get
Yeah.
this slap back, and you get all these sort of distorted frequencies, and it's a funny sound. If you've ever played outdoors, it's a bit like that because the walls are so far away.
Yep.
You haven't got that closed-in feeling. So we're playing. I can hear every single thing that every instrument's playing, and it was a great sound. But it was music minus one. So
Right.
they'd taken all of the really fancy stuff either out or they hadn't put it in because it's film music. And we're playing to a live audience that evening, 5,000 people. So I thought it needs a boot up the backside.
Yeah. That's interesting, isn't it?
So I've sod it. So I started to improvise a bit more, which means that there's 9 double bass players with the LSO who are not playing the right bass line anymore because I'm mucking about.
Yeah. Yeah. Carry on.
So I thought, oh, you're only young once. Sod it. So one by one, I saw them stop playing.
Brilliant.
Yeah, one by one, they all stopped playing.
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
just put the bows down,
And what
and
happened?
no one did anything. No one said anything. And we came to the coffee break, the tea break, halfway through, and nobody said anything. Nobody said it was right or wrong. Not a dicky bird. Nobody. And so I got me a cup of coffee, and I'm standing around thinking, I feel embarrassed. Anyway, I saw all the bass players in a huddle in the corner.
Go on.
So I thought, I've got to go over and say something. So I went over and said, look, guys, I'm really, really sorry. But to be perfectly honest, the music was just so boring. It just needed a kick up the backside. And they all said, we agree with you. Absolutely agree with you. So I said, I'm sorry if the horns came out and I'm mucking about and it left you high and dry with nothing to play. They said, oh no, we'd rather be doing what you're doing. And that was the first feedback I had. So I thought, okay, well, you're not an idiot. You're doing something right.
Yeah.
So I said, do you mind me doing that through the show? They said, no, you just do what you want. And if anything fits in, we'll play along with you.
Well, it's really interesting when you say music minus one, because the function of film music is to support a narrative in the film there.
Yeah.
But when you put
It's
it into
not to
the
distract
context,
from the film.
yeah, but when you put it into the context of a concert, it needs plus one adding again, doesn't it, to make it into something? So, yeah, and I guess that is the role of the bass player, to know how to do that, to know what we can add to, when to respect the music
It's
and when
adding
to
a bit
add.
of spice. You add a little bit of spice just so it grooves a bit more. Because on the original sessions, you can't play a lot of stuff. I'll give an example. I did a movie once called The Life and Death of Peter Sellers. It's for HBO. And when you did too much, they really stopped you from playing because they were afraid you were going to do anything that related to the original Pink Panther music.
Okay.
And they said, if you play anything that's not written, we're going to get sued.
Yep.
And they said to me, this is absolutely serious. If you don't read what's on the part, it could cost us a fortune.
Fascinating.
And they said, our big fear is that the Pink Panther music publishers will sue HBO because we've done anything that infringes on their copyright. And they said, this music, believe it or not, has been listened to by lawyers, and every note has been passed as being legal and copyright free.
Wow.
So they said, if you don't play what's written, we'll have to do another take.
Okay.
And throughout the day, they had these lawyers in LA listening to what we were doing in London. It was an open line all day. They listened to every single take and they might say, do another one, because somebody played
Yeah.
something that wasn't written.
Fantastic. What I'm taking from this is the breadth and depth of your experience. How many different scenarios you've seen over what must be the last 50 plus years of this job. Just we'll stick just for a moment longer with the period when you were a quote unquote session musician, or were a session musician. What did a day in the life of you in the 80s look like?
A day in the life.
Yeah. What would a day of sessions be, or a week of sessions be?
It could be a variety of things. In those days, this is before the 90s, you might be doing records, in which case, early on, you're doing 4 tracks a session. So you'd finish an album in a day. If you go back to the Beatles' first album, for instance, that was done in a day. Remember that song, Please? No, Twist and Shout.
Yeah.
Remember the Beatles' Twist and Shout? That was done at 11 o'clock at night. And John's voice was shot at that point. And you can hear on the record, he is knackered. It's a fabulous record. That was all done in a day. So that's how we made pop music. You do tracks very quickly. So some sessions were very much like that. And when you got to the studio, you never quite knew what was going to be thrown at you. So it was always, all you had was a time, a date, and a venue. You didn't know more than that. So you turned up with all your various guitars, and then you got there and it might be an orchestra you were playing with, or it might be a bass guitar overdub, or it might be a rhythm section you're working with, or it might be a movie or a jingle. You just didn't know.
Right.
So you've got to be able to read, number one. You can't read, go home.
Yep.
Because you're going to get caught out very fast.
So how many of these were you doing a day in the heyday?
It worked 10 in the morning till 1,
Yep.
2 till 5, and 6 till 9.
And would that all be in the same location, or would you be moving venue?
All of that,
Really?
either in the same location or you'd be driving to different studios. If it was an album for a pop musician, you might be working for a pop group, let's say, not rock group, pop group. You might be working from 10 at night till 4 in the morning. So sometimes they had funny hours. I did some stuff with Ian Gillan at one point. You could only work at night because he bought a studio that was underneath the British Aircraft Corporation.
Right. Brilliant.
and and they were very heavy people. And if he was operating in the studio while they're in their offices, they couldn't hear themselves work.
Yeah, yeah.
So they got the studio banned from playing in office hours. So he could operate from 6 o'clock at night onwards, but not during the day.
Right.
So the stuff I did with him was from 6 o'clock. So we'd start at 7 and go on till the early hours. And the bizarre thing was that if you wanted a really good echo, and I don't mean reverb, I mean echo, you'd put the singer in the car park.
Brilliant.
You'd have a microphone, he'd be in the car park. It was a fantastic sound.
Brilliant. Oh, I
And
love it.
because there's nobody around, it didn't matter.
Oh, it's amazing. So we've got a real sense of you as a session musician now, but things started to change going into the 90s, and you started
Yeah.
moving into the world of education. I believe you also owned a studio at one point. Can you talk about the shifts that started to happen there?
Yeah, I'd been doing a lot of variety of things, records, jingles, movies, all various things. And then as you get a little bit older, you're not 18 anymore. So you can't really work with the same young cats anymore. They want people of their own generation, which is fine. I understand that. And as you get a bit older, you actually want something more sophisticated anyway. So if you're still making pop records when you're 40, you're a bit out of joint. And I know guys do that. That's absolutely fine. But as far as I was concerned, as I got older, I wanted to do something more challenging. I did a session once where I met a few other people who had the same experience. We were playing a song that had 4 chords, and it took 9 hours to record. Do you remember that song "Without You" by Nilsson?
Yeah, yeah.
That was a massive, massive hit. Barry Morgan was the drummer, and Barry was the drummer. Was the drummer on the session, and again another big hero of mine. He kind of took me under his wing when I
Yep.
came into the studios, and he said we spent 9 hours recording that song, and it's an iconic song. He said, and in the end they used take 4 or something like that. Just nonsense, you know. And he said, at the end of that, I had this terrible migraine. And he said, I didn't do studio work for another 2 years after that. I just couldn't face it. It was just such a bad experience. He said, I joined Blue Mink and went off on the road. Great. And I always remember that. So when it came to the 90s and I was getting a bit fed up doing either television shows that didn't really let me play, or there's a lot of hanging around, or films where you just play cues, bing bong, bing bong, bing bong, and you sit around for 32 bars, bing bong, bing bong. I thought, oh God, just want to play. So it reached the point where I wanted to be more creative. And the commercial records I did, they just wanted straight ahead stuff, which is fine. Jazz things tended to be a bit angular, a bit strange. So I wasn't doing anything that I particularly enjoyed. So I thought, I just want to get out of studios. I'm not actually enjoying this anymore. And then coincidentally, we hit the 90s and Thatcher's Britain. And Thatcher's advice was go out, borrow money, and start your business. So I thought, great idea, I'll do that. So I started a big studio and it was doing really, really well. And then we hit the recession and my interest payments went from 4% to 14%.
My God.
Now, I
Wow.
don't know what your mortgage is, but say your mortgage is 5%
Yep.
and it went to 14%, triple your outgoings at the moment.
Yep.
That's what happened in Thatcher's Britain. So it was not a fun time.
Can
So
imagine.
basically, I got blown out the water. My whole generation got blown out the water. So um, I was ringing around people saying, is there any work? There's nothing. The studios had all, I wrote to every single record company and they said, we're doing nothing. We're not releasing anything. We're not recording anything. It's just, blitzkrieg. There's nothing happening. So I was talking to John Heisman at one point, and he said, well, we're going out on tour to Germany. Do you fancy joining the band? I said, yeah. He said, I never thought of asking you before because you've always been tied up in studios. I said, well, there's nothing happening, so I'd be delighted. So this for me was a voyage of discovery, getting out on the road again and
Yeah.
playing with the band. And I was playing. Way, it was great. It was fantastic. I was allowed to play what I wanted to play. And if I played the part, they'd say, this isn't you. Ignore the part. Do
Brilliant.
what you want to do. Oh, thanks, guys. And the whole band, in some respects, was turned on its head because I was able to do what I wanted. So people were chopping and changing with their own parts. So a
Yep.
new member of the band comes in, and the whole thing shifts.
Yep.
And I didn't play in a traditional way. I'd been in studios for 20 years in my little time bubble, my little time capsule, experimenting like a mad professor with bass styles. So it's like a kid in a toy shop. Whee! And that was wonderful. And it was like being released from prison almost. Not that I can make a direct parallel because I'm not yet.
Incarcerated. Yes.
As, as somebody once said to me, talking about teaching, they said, "Do you have a criminal record?" And I said, "No." So it doesn't mean anything. It just means you haven't been caught yet.
Brilliant.
So being on tour was a huge relief. And we did about 350 gigs all over Europe, particularly in Germany, which is a great territory to work in. They really appreciate particularly what the Brits do.
Yep.
France didn't want to know.
Sure.
The France did not get what we do at all. We did a bit in Holland and a bit in Czech Republic, a bit in Poland, and they were pretty hit. Austria and Switzerland were difficult because their tax laws were a bit odd and it's very expensive. And it's very hard to be a promoter. But particularly in Germany, a few gigs in Britain, we did Ronnie Scott's and various places. But it was a fantastic relief. And working with John again, who was an inspirational drummer, it was just a fantastic time. So I thought, well, now I'm out of prison, I don't want to go back in. So
Okay.
I didn't hustle to get back in the studios again. It's not really what I wanted to do. And then we'd come off tour at one point, and as my whole family were artists, musicians, and teachers, I thought I ought to teach really. And the reason that that was in my mind a bit was because I'd been a couple of years before a studio in Stockholm, ABBA's studio, and I was talking to the guitar player. We were there for a week. I said to him, "Oh, I'll see you in the morning then." And he said, "I'm not here in the morning tomorrow." I said, "Why? Well, you've got another gig." He said, "I'm teaching." I said, "What? You'd
Ah.
rather teach than be in the studio?" And he gave me a lecture. He said, "It's your duty. It's your duty to teach." And at the end, I thought, yeah, you're right. You're absolutely right. So I decided on January the 1st, whatever year, to start teaching. And a guy rang me up out of the blue, January the 2nd, and said, "Do you teach?" And I said, "Well, first, two things. Firstly, I've never been asked before. And as from yesterday, yes, I do." So he came over and he'd been at one of the conservatoires, not yours. He'd been at another conservatoire for 4 years. And I said, "What the hell do you want another bass teacher for?" I said, "You must be fed up with them by now." He must have been fed up with me by the end of it.
We'll talk about that in a bit.
So I said, "Well, let's just have a little play." I said, "Just play me a riff." And he said, "I don't know any." I said, "You've been at a conservatoire for 4 years. You don't know any riffs?" He said, "No." I said, "You sure?" He said, yeah. So I thought, okay, maybe teaching is going right back to the roots. So it's great being a jazz player and being able to play all the complicated stuff. Not everybody gets jazz, but
Okay.
play me a groove. He didn't know any.
All right, this is fascinating. It leads directly into my next question. My memory of teaching with you, the most prolific kind of thing that you said, or pertinent thing you said to me, is I want to make you employable. And
Yeah,
I remember it clear as the light of day.
yeah.
And it seems to me you had an incredible mission to make bass players employable. I don't know whether you ever consciously thought that or not, but where did that ethos come from?
My earliest memory of somebody saying the right thing at the right time was a club in Manchester, and it was this John Coleman guy I mentioned earlier. We were playing for Lulu. I was having a chat with John, and John was a big deal in the studios. He'd drive up from London to Manchester in the evening to conduct the band. Then he'd drive back to London, work in the studios all day, come back to Manchester. So we were there for a week, and John was backwards and forwards every single day. And I said, how do you do this? Anyway, he was knackered, but we were just having a chat. And I was telling him, that I didn't really know where I was going to end up. And he said to me, oh, don't worry, you'll always work. And I was 21, 20, something like that. And I said, oh, will I? And it didn't really mean a great deal to me because I thought, well, how the hell do you know? And then a year later, he was booking me for studio work and whatnot. Anyway, years later, once he'd retired, he was about 80. I went to see him and I said, I always wanted to thank you because that was always in the back of my mind when I had no work at all, things were going badly or whatever. You said I would always work. What made you say that? He said, you were hungry. It's as simple as that. And you were like that. And I have to say that most of the bass players I teach in the colleges, they're mostly hungry. Some of them aren't, and they haven't done the revision. They haven't looked at the music through the week. They haven't practiced. They haven't sorted stuff out. They come for the next lesson. They're making the same mistakes, and you say to them, "What do you want to do when you leave college?" And they say, "Oh, I want to be a bass player." Oh, right, okay, all right. Well, let's carry on. And you think you're not hungry. How can you succeed if you're not hungry?
Yeah.
So if it's a local group you just want to work with after you've been to your 9 to 5 job and you just want to play with your local band and have a good time, that's fantastic. That's great. Some people just want to play at home, put their headphones on and play to record. Fantastic. That's great. If you want to be in the business, you have to be hungry. It's all about motivation. And as you've said in the past, it's not easy in the business. No one's just going to ring you up and say you're going to work for the rest of your life. You've got to practice things that aren't necessarily wanted at the time, but you've got them handy if you need them. You've got all these different styles. You can read, you can hustle, you can keep knocking on people's doors. You keep at it all the time. You keep working every day at this stuff. So whatever situation you're in, you can handle it or get close to it. And that's the whole point. If you're not hungry, you'll get into those situations and go, what do you want me to do?
Yeah.
They're not going to hire you. It's as simple as that.
That's really fascinating. I'm going to ask you in a second what your recollections of me are. I don't want to drift into that quite yet. But I want to...
You sure you want to go down that?
Oh, yeah, definitely I do. And I think anybody who's watching this wants me to. It's really interesting that you said that phrase, I want to make you employable. And I was in a scenario where I was studying jazz, which is an art form. An art form doesn't necessarily make you employable. That distinction for me was absolutely crucial. What you saw that I needed to earn a living when I left college was huge. And where did that come from? Because it was such a different narrative from potentially what I was being given by the institution.
Some of these conservatoires will get 170 people applying for a jazz course, of which a very, very small minority are people from poorer backgrounds. Now, the danger is most of the jazz players coming or applying for a college degree, that they're aware it's not going to earn them a living. So if you've come from a background where money's not an issue, you don't really worry about money. And you're interested in jazz, oh, go to jazz college. Jazz is not going to make you a living. How many people in Britain make a living out of jazz alone?
Very, very few.
One or two? Most of us do other stuff as well. We do pop, we do teaching, we do writing, we
Sure.
do, all sorts of funny things. And what is jazz anyway? So I was very aware of that. If you're on a jazz course, you have to be able to earn a living. So all the teaching I did, first of all, was focused on teaching you how harmony works and how rhythm works in the jazz scenario. But I was also aware that as a bass guitar player, you've got to be able to play stuff after 1965. So that's why I introduced it to James Jamerson and Stanley Clarke and the Jackos and those sort of things, so that you'd have an understanding of how that works, so you can make a living in the more contemporary world. And that was the whole point. If I just taught what they call the core curriculum, which was all the standards, you'd have understood jazz, but you wouldn't have understood anything about post 1965. And I've taught people, for instance, on some of these courses where the guy will be doing quite well, and then for whatever reason, he's gone to study double bass and left the bass guitar alone, which is fine. It's entirely up to him. Then I've heard him play a couple of years later, and the bass guitar playing has not progressed at all.
Interesting.
Not at all. So he's a great jazz player, and you hope the guy's going to earn a living. But in my experience, a jazz gig going to pay you 60 quid or
Mm-hmm.
40 quid. What's that? $100,
Something.
$50.
50,
It's not,
$100.
it's not going to make you a living. So it was really imperative that when you leave college, you're hireable as a commercial musician. And then maybe you'll get to play a bit of jazz as well. But then what is jazz? There's so much commercial music that has elements of jazz in it. Funk has elements of jazz. Gospel music does. The blues has elements of jazz. Jazz rock, jazz funk, hip hop. They've all got elements of jazz in there. And if they don't, maybe you can introduce bits and pieces. But it was important for me that you would understand how jazz had developed into the future, so that you could get those skills. And then, having understood the history, if you like, because we went kind of back to bebop, you figured out how bebop worked. We looked at Chick Corea's Spain, and
Yeah.
I remember that.
Yeah.
And then various other bits and pieces that we did, so that by referencing other things, you're able to see what was going to happen in the future.
Yeah.
And you could either develop things of your own, going in your own direction, or if other things were happening that you were interested in, you could figure out how it worked because you understood the references they were making. So
Brilliant.
that's that, and I still do that. So
Um,
very often I'll be teaching funk, for instance, up to the end of 1960,
yep.
and then I'll start teaching Latin, reggae, and African music after the 60s funk,
Interesting.
because I find that inspirational in terms of rhythm and harmony. Because
Right.
African music, for instance, is very often very pentatonic. Traditionally, it's pentatonic, which is quite different from the diatonic soul music.
Interesting. Interesting. So, what I remember and why I was drawn to you as a teacher is I was in college, and the education I was getting at this time was more like turn up to a lesson and the teacher would go, well, what do you need? And I'd be 18 years old and going, I don't know. But I'd turn up to you, a lesson with you, and you'd go, right, this is what you need. You need this, 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 and this. You had a clear methodology, and I could see you laughing, going, maybe cringing, but it was so
No, not
pivotal.
not not at all. I never cringe.
All
No,
right,
no.
okay. I could see that you had a clear methodology. You had thought through what a student needs. Where did that come from?
When I was floundering around when I was younger, there were no bass teachers, so I had to figure out how stuff worked. I understood from NIJO, National Youth Jazz Orchestra, how to play jazz charts, and there were a few sort of poppy, jazz rocky type things. And so I understood all that. Functional harmony, the way chords shifted around, I kind of understood that. But I didn't really know how to play creative bass lines. And I was aware that the jazz players on bass, double bass players, whenever they played anything that was a bit poppy or a bit Latin, I never really had any affinity to that. I didn't. It didn't do anything for me at all. When I heard the rock players, the funk players, and that sort of thing, it was quite inspirational. The jazz bass players, when they were playing swing, great. But when they did anything that was kind of a 8 feel or 16 feel, it didn't do anything for me at all. So I thought, what's the answer? And I remember very distinctly, I was at a party. I was 16 years old. I was at my girlfriend's house in Leatherhead. I was on the top floor and I heard a Motown record playing downstairs. And I thought, what is that?
Wow.
So I went downstairs and just sat there glued for the rest of the evening thinking, bloody hell, I don't know anything about this. And I went out and bought, I think, 110 albums, Motown albums,
Wow. Yeah.
just to try and understand it.
Yeah.
So I had to develop my own methodology.
Yep.
And then I heard Jacko. How the hell does that work? I first heard him when I think I was 17.
Yep.
He was about 21. And he played these. What is that a piano? No, it's a bass. What? It was harmonics and fretless and
Yeah.
jazz things. What? Nobody played solos. Jazz bass players didn't really do solos. James Jamerson soloing was not good. I've heard it. It's not good. Chuck Rainey is not a great soloist. That's not what they do. That was another generation. And it's arguable they do things we don't do.
Yeah.
They invented a whole range of stuff that have subsequently become iconic. So these are iconic guys, but they didn't really solo. It wasn't really expected. So I had to develop my own methodology. So when I started teaching, I thought, well, I'll show them how the Jameson thing works. Then at least you can do soul music. I'll show them how the Chuck Rainey thing works. Then at least you know what happens after that. Because the Jameson thing generally is legato, very legato playing, like a jazz double bass. And I see Jameson's funk lines as being syncopated jazz lines.
Yep. I'd agree.
So if he goes, for instance, dong 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 dong, that's a walking bass line. And the funk line, bang, doom, down, do, down, day, doom, down, do, down, which is the walking bass line, syncopated.
Yeah. One of the interesting things you taught me, or you were telling me, is Jameson also was a slap player as well. I realised that. Tell us that story.
These guys, we don't know most of what they did. Jameson all the time was moonlighting from Motown, apparently. I talked to some guys who said he used to work for Jackie Wilson a lot. So do you remember that song Higher and Higher? Your love is... That was Jameson. He
Interesting.
was moonlighting. He used to say to people, don't tell anyone I'm here. He did loads of things for other people, but they couldn't say he was on the record. Yeah, I was talking to a friend who'd been over to America, and they'd been to Stevie Wonder's studio, and they were looking around. And while he was there, he met Stephen Henderson, who had been Stevie Wonder's, Michael Henderson, who had been Stevie Wonder's bass player. And he was talking about bass playing. And Mike said, oh, yeah, I do quite a lot of slapping these days. And they said, oh, that's interesting. Where did you get that from? He said, you'll never believe this. He said, James Jamerson showed me how to slap.
Wow, I'd never have guessed that.
Yeah, and Michael said, well, this sounds great. Well, why don't you do more slapping on records, James? He said, they won't let me.
That's the early 60s, isn't it? Or mid 60s.
Well, yeah, there's a preconceived idea about what you do.
Yeah.
Chuck Rainey told me a story. He said he was doing a session for Steely Dan, and he's got this way of playing where you tap the string.
Yep.
it's like it's not hammering it, but you tap it lightly, so that you get the sound coming through, but it doesn't strike in the traditional fingerstyle way. So if you listen to certain Chuck Rainey tracks, I can't for the life of it, I can't think of the name of it offhand. There's one Steely Dan track where it sticks out like a sore thumb. It's just fantastic playing. And he said they were always telling me what to play and not what to play. He said at one point I was doing something like that, and they said, "Oh, Chuck, we don't like that." He said, "You don't. Why not?" He said, "Well, it looks like you're doing something different." He said, "So I moved a screen in front, so they couldn't see what I was doing. So he said all they could see was my head, and so he said, I'm playing away, and they said, "Oh, we like that. That's good." No, just use your ears. But it's this idea of having preconceived ideas. Let the guy play and then judge it. So yeah, so they wouldn't let Jameson play other things, and he got a bit miserable about that. And then when Motown moved to LA, it completely changed.
Sure.
And I was a big fan of Jameson, and I bought stuff that he'd recorded in LA, and I could tell he wasn't happy. You can hear it in the playing.
Interesting.
It's just there's nothing happening. You
Hmm.
can hear him thinking, "God, this is so boring," and it was. And at that point, the producers had started to take over. At Motown, it was writer and arranger driven,
Yep.
and the producer would just say, "Yes, it's a take. No, it's not a take." But once you got to the 70s and LA particularly, the producer was in charge of the session, and you'd be doing the same track for 6 hours. And God, yes, of course it's boring. It's very important to let people play. If you've got a bunch of people, let them play to find out the best they can deliver or think it through. And if you thought it through, we'll get the guys that fit. Yeah, so Jameson was not able to do the things he wanted, and he wasn't very happy. Chuck Rainey could play more what he wanted to do, and I asked him about that, and he said, also, I said to him, "Did anyone at any time ever write any of your bass lines?" He said, "No." I said, "I didn't think so. They all sound like Chuck Rainey." He said, "Yeah, they just gave me a chord chart." So Quincy Jones just gave him chord charts, and he'd come up with this iconic bass line, and he was making everyone sound like a genius. So I said, "Chuck, why don't you put this in a book? Because your bass lines are amazing." He said, "I can't. I don't own the copyright for the recording." So if he put all that stuff in the book, he'd have got sued. And he's a lovely guy, lovely, lovely guy, and a great player and iconic. He was the next step from Jameson. When Jameson lost heart,
Brilliant.
Chuck was there, and he kind of picked up the
Yeah.
slack, you know.
So let's go back to your methodology. You clearly saw
Me,
a
me,
methodology was needed.
sorry.
You clearly saw a methodology was needed. How did that come about, and how did that turn into your first book?
When I started teaching, it was obvious that a lot of students had huge gaps in their learning. They either didn't know riffs, or the next student said to me, "I don't know anything about Latin music." I thought, "Oh, I know a bit." Another guy wanted this, another guy wanted that. One guy wanted to learn to read, somebody wanted to learn to improvise. So they all had different things that they wanted to do. So I was devising systems to help different people do different things. So when I was away on tour with Barbara Thompson, John Heisman, I thought, "Oh, I'll write a book while I'm away," as you do. And I took loads of recordings so I could do some research, and I was scribbling away during the day. So all the systems that I'd been developing went into this book. So as a result of doing some teaching, I was able to get the student's perspective. I could get a student's perspective on what they needed to know. So that's why the first Bass Bible was reasonably successful. Everybody called their book Space Bible after that.
Yeah.
So there's 300 books called Bass Bible. Nice. So that was about styles from different countries. The next Bass Bible I did, number two, there was more about harmony, improvisation, how to develop styles. A few other countries that I hadn't really visited before in the first book, like the Middle East. I found that music Very interesting. The scales there, for instance, they can be 7-note scales, but they're not diatonic. So I got into looking at Middle Eastern music. I did a project which was based on the songs in William Shakespeare's plays. And I didn't know he had songs in the plays. And I played some of them to my mother, and she said, "Oh, we still learn those at school." Not anymore. I didn't even know that some of his plays were musicals.
Yep.
They're full of songs. Anyway, some of them are fantastic songs. He didn't write them. The rhythms that they had in those days, they were so sophisticated. This is 1,000 years ago. You imagine a drummer or a percussion section. They were playing jazz, hip hop, funk, rock, blues, R&B, Latin, salsa, samba. All of that stuff. They had it all. And they've got stuff we don't even have. We're not even close to having. So not only do they go back 1,000 years, they go a long way into the future. So that's partly what the book deals with, where it comes from. So a lot of stuff I did with you, for instance, was referencing stuff.
Yep.
And once you get interested in referencing, you start looking for yourself. Where's it going to go? Where can I take it? So if, for instance, you're doing an undergraduate course, you're basically learning stuff. And I see the first 2 years as learning stuff, and the third and fourth years, or third year, as developing it technically to a higher level. If you do a postgrad and you're going for a master's degree, you roll all of that up into a big ball. Where are you going to take it?
Right.
That, for me, is a master's. If you haven't done the groundwork, how can you do a master's? So this is part of the problem. So sometimes people come to the colleges who haven't been to that college, and they come for the first lesson. I realise they don't actually know very much. So my job is to give them a very fast history lesson, if you like. So you can play bebop, you can play the cool period, the impressionistic period, the Motown stuff, the rock, the funk, because you understand how it works. And if you put in any situation, you'll be fine.
Yep.
And that's why people hire you, because you're reliable. You can do it. But if you want a solo, if they want a solo, you can do a solo in any of those styles. Yep. That's the point. It makes your life more interesting. So that's how I kind of see the job as a teacher. That's how I see books. So that you're showing something in the book that hopefully people can understand, and they can make it part of what they do. And they can also see that the end of the book is not the end of the story.
Yep.
So the book takes them somewhere else. Yep. And that's really important. And the new book, for instance, deconstructs a great deal of stuff. It teaches you about language and analysis, which is really important.
So if I look back to my time working with you, I'd seen your videos, I'd seen your book, and then I found this advert in the back of Guitarist magazine. I knew exactly who you were. And in my first couple of years of college, I had private lessons with you. And then come third year of college, I said, Paul Westwood is the guy I want to study with. And thankfully, the politics of the institution let that happen. And so third and fourth year,
you got me the job.
Well, yeah. And I was thrilled when I was talking to you a couple of years ago to hear.
I'm still there.
And you're still there now?
Yeah.
Amazing. And I
but
feel
not on the jazz course.
You're on the commercial, aren't you? Or the whatever.
It's called the Bampi course. Yeah, because and I teach exactly the same stuff.
Brilliant.
Because I'm making sure that the jazz musicians, and I teach some jazz musicians, make sure they understand the commercial, the more modern. I call it commercial. Commercial has a bad overtone. It's popular music.
Yep.
Make sure the jazzers understand that so they can earn a living. And I make sure that the people involved in contemporary music understand the earlier stuff so they can work with those musicians as well. So I teach the same stuff. Don't tell anyone, because it's important. You all understand all of this stuff, because if you don't know where it's come from, how do you know where it's going to? Say, for instance, you go to a college where they only teach you stuff that starts at 1970. And then you're asked to play with a group that's doing something that's a bit bebop-y. You won't know what to play. Or a bit impressionistic or the cool period, you won't know what to play. Or it's Motown, you won't know what to play.
So my question of you is, and I'm thrilled to hear you're still there 20 plus years later, is what are your memories of teaching me?
You're hungry for a start, and you wouldn't take no for an answer.
Brilliant. Can you lean into that a bit more?
You knew what you wanted. You were very focused. And how can I get there? And it wasn't necessarily getting there quickly. It was how can I get there in a very solid way. You've always been like that. And that's what I kind of look for in people. Because sometimes people ring me up and say, can you recommend anyone for such and such? You need someone who's solid, who's not going to let them down, who will turn up, someone who will answer your phone call, will answer your emails, will answer your texts quickly. They'll turn up on time. And every musician I know, his biggest nightmare is being late for a gig. I still get that.
Yeah.
Still get that.
Yeah.
Had that last night. I'm
Yeah.
going to be late. It's weird. It's just ingrained in you. I'll give you an example. I turned up for Jingle late once. I was 10 minutes late. And I was full of apology. I'm so sorry, full of traffic was unbelievable. Sat down, played like a demon just to try and make up for it all. And the guy came up and he said, don't worry, I can see what you're doing. It's very impressive, but you'll never work for me again. As simple as that. You're late, you're unemployable. You're always on time. You're always presentable. You'd had a shower, you cleaned your teeth, you practiced. Well, that's it. And you're always polite. You're always smiling. And life's too important to be miserable and not to do your best. You did your best.
I can tell you one of
In a
my
nutshell.
recollections is I can remember through the vantage point of 20 plus years of feeling like I was struggling, having times that were very, very challenging. And I always felt like you had my back. And for me, that has always stayed with me of something that I want to give any student, any person I work with, mentor, help, is just to know someone's in their corner. I felt like through a challenging period of my life where there was a lot to learn, a lot of change going on when you're going into your early 20s and figuring out how to earn a living, where there's no playbook, no rule book or anything like that. It's all pretty much self-employed, who knows who, and all that kind of how to negotiate the thing. Of having someone in your corner was the most valuable thing. And of course, the incredible knowledge that you passed on too. So I just want to publicly say thank you to that because it's meant a huge amount. It's stayed with me for the last 20 plus years. So
Well, you're very welcome. I'm glad you've carried it on because you've had your own experiences. You've carried on researching, exploring different ideas, developing stuff. You're helping other people. You pass it on. That's really important. And my father put it in a nutshell when he said, you have to pass these things on because if it's left to governments, we would be a barbarian society because the governments cut education all the time. They're cutting, they're shaving bits, they're shaving that. So, for instance, if I do, say, 20 hours teaching a week, I'll do another 15 hours online lessons for people to help them catch up. Or if you've got a class of people and they're mismatched, I'll give the ones who are not doing quite so well a separate lesson on their own because they can't keep up with the fast ones. So you have to do what's right for the individual so that you create a better society. So when I popped my clogs in the end, I did my best and hopefully I left the place in a little bit better condition than it would otherwise have been.
this leads very nicely into my last question for you. If this conversation was the last thing people heard from you, and hopefully it's not, what would you want them to know, remember, or carry forward with them?
Well, do your best and keep helping people. That's massively important. I've spent my whole life supporting people, families, in studios, on gigs. And I don't even think of it as helping people. I'm just doing what's necessary. And it's being part of a community. And it's staying in touch with people. I'm still in touch with loads of different bass players, and we meet up from time to time. We're online. And there's three guys who've got the same birthday as me. We exchange, and these are guys from lessons before you, after you, and so we exchange texts and emails every birthday. One's in Manchester and others in Australia, and people go all over the place. But it's important to just keep moving forward and keep trying to keep the world a better civilized place. And music breaks down barriers. In England, the Germans particularly like what we do in terms of creative music. So John Heisman and Barbara Thompson taught me that touring with them. So by taking our music over there, it's just a bigger community. They understand us better. We understand them better, which breaks down barriers. So you don't get the same awful situations going on in the world today with Russia, Ukraine, and Israel, Gaza. It's all a terrible misunderstanding. It's a horrible misunderstanding. We can all live comfortably if we just get on with each other. So maybe you've got to have some common ground. So if bass players are, as a community and musicians in general are able to keep in contact with each other and swap ideas and promote albums,
Indeed, promote albums.
Mara Records, yeah, and stay in touch with each other, the world's a better place. So I deal with German people and Canadian people, American people, Australian people all the time. And it just fantastic. I've been to about 30 different countries, and I discovered that people all over the world are fantastic. I was in Beirut talking to people there, and I said, "What the hell's going on?" And they said, "Well, it's just a few lunatics. Most of us are just ordinary folks." They were lovely, absolutely lovely people. There's nothing wrong with people. You've just got a few lunatics, and they seem to upset everybody. So what we've got to do is try and hang on to our sanity, stay in touch with each other, and just make the place a better place to be. That's really important. And the other thing is stay out of jail. Do you know why Alfred Hitchcock said that? Stay out of jail.
Go on.
Because he was terrified of being taken to jail.
Paul Westwood, thank you so much for your time today.
Lovely to see you. Thanks, James.
And that feels like the perfect way to close this series. Over the past few weeks, I've had the honour of speaking with some of the most inspiring figures in the bass world. But this conversation with Paul Westwood has been far more personal. Paul just didn't teach me how to play. He taught me how to think like a musician, how to prepare, how to look after the music, how to be employable. He reminded me and continues to remind us that community really matters. The bass players, just like any other group of musicians, thrive when we support each other and share what we've learned and help lift each other up. So to finish this 60K celebration with Paul feels incredibly fitting, absolutely full circle. Paul, thank you for the wisdom, the honesty and the stories, and for helping shaping me as a musician. And thank you to everyone for watching and being part of the eBassGuitar journey. If you haven't checked out any of the interviews, make sure you check out the one with Leland Sklar, Travis Dykes, Mark Langes, Roger Sadowski and Paul Thompson. Go check them out. But for now, here's to the next 60K and the amazing community of bass players we're building together. Cheers, I've been James from eBassGuitar.com, and please hit that subscribe button.